Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your patience. We had a long meeting, 3 hours, and the meeting was substantive and long precisely because we know that the process is in a difficult situation right now. Events that are not directly related to the talks, but the situation that occurred over the vote in the Greek Cypriot parliament, but also the ensuing discussion that has been quite heated over this has turned into a relatively serious problem for this process. However, and we, of course, we are working on ways to overcome that, and I think steps will be taken in the coming days that might be helpful in that respect, without being able to go more into detail on that. However, after having seen Mr. Anastasiades yesterday and Mr. Akıncı now, it's very clear to me that both leaders remain committed to making this work. There is a strong desire to find the way both to continue the talks, even if it's not likely to happen immediately, but hopefully the sooner the better. But even more importantly, in my view, since I do believe that we will get together and continue, is to work on the new methodology, which brings, let's say, speedier progress on those outstanding issues that we now have had as outstanding for several months. Because frankly speaking, after Geneva, we have had a number of meetings, but not significant progress. Before this particular crisis, the meetings were not bad. They were simply a little bit slow in producing new breakthroughs on key issues. And I think all of us, the leaders and myself, we all agree that sometimes time was spent on minor issues that should have been better spent on larger issues. So we are discussing now constructively, I would say, new ideas about how to organize the time from when talks continue towards hopefully an agreement in a way where we systematically go through all core issues and see their interrelationships even better than we've done before. And that part of the discussion is constructive. And again, we're still working on this, so I'm not able to lay out in any detail. And of course, this is also issues internal to the process. But this is something which will be on the top of my own agenda now to really prepare for this, because we have a crisis, and a crisis, you can do two things with a crisis. You can allow it to continue as a crisis until the whole thing breaks down, or you can use the crisis as a wake-up call for a new approach and turn the crisis into opportunity. I think that's what both leaders want. It's definitely what the Secretary General and I do want, and all the international support we have, but it's also my strong impression after two honest and frank and very good meetings, clear meetings, that the leaders hope that this is possible. I think that the coming weeks will be decisive. I know that's been said before, but I think it's more true than ever before that the fate of the process, not only this one, but the fate of the question of whether Cyprus will be reunified will be decided in the coming weeks, in plural, more than one. But I'm not saying months, the coming weeks. And I think many people have a role to play in laying the foundations for this, continuing on an adequate pace and actually grasping the opportunity to do it in a new way. And I call on everybody who has some influence of that to actually use that. This is really a time of strategic leadership, and true leadership shows itself in crisis. It's not very difficult to be a leader when everything is fine. It's really, the leaders we remember in history are the leaders who made the right choices in the most difficult circumstances, like winning the war or creating the peace. And this is really what we will all be watching now, that this kind of leadership is possible. And I'm of course talking about the leaders, but not only them. And I want to reiterate, the leaders have the primary responsibility. Of course, we, the UN, have the responsibility as well. But a lot of people have to do what they can and really understand that this is not the time for business as usual. This is a time to really ask the big question: do we want the island to be reunified, and are we ready to do the necessary things to go that final mile? Having said that, I want to reiterate again something I keep saying, and it just becomes more and more obvious to me that despite of issues on trust, and despite of concrete disagreement on issues inside and outside, and particularly outside of the talks, it's perfectly possible to solve this question. 22 months have been invested, and most of those months have been used systematically and creatively to solve many of the issues in most of the chapters. All chapters are on the table, including security and guarantees, where we had a constructive dialogue, including territory, which is not done, but we have come further than any pair of leaders have done ever before. It's perfectly possible. There is nothing in the talks to suggest it can't be done, but it cannot be done without trust. And you need the trust between the leaders. I have sometimes been, some people have criticized me for being too optimistic. My colleagues say that there's worse things to be criticized for than being an optimist, but anyway, I accept that. But I've also said every single time, and I know that's a fact, that I've said the reason for my optimism has been the trust and will and leadership I detected at the level of Mr. Anastasiades and Mr. Akıncı and their relationship. And secondary to that is, of course, the trust between communities. To re-establish the necessary trust between the two communities is a more complicated issue, but it will not be possible without re-establishing the trustful relationship and the approach and the leadership that we saw from the top through all these months. And that's very much what my focus is on. I have no particular news. There's no particular event in the immediate coming days, neither one I mention or not mention, but we will continue this work to find a way to continue the talks as soon as possible, and then when we continue to really use our time much more effectively than we've been able to do in the first months of this year.
So what are the next steps then for this continuation, towards the continuation? What are the next steps?
I've answered that in code, so you have to try to analyze what I actually said.
A new methodology could be a give and take stage and talks only between the two leaders and you?
We will. I cannot answer yes or no, but we have to think about the optimal way of organizing a interdependent discussion. But exactly, and the leaders, of course, have to be very central to that. But beyond that, there's not much I can say.
Okay,
One,
thank
I
you
one,
very
yeah.
much. Still on the cards in March? Is that still a possibility?
A conference in Geneva is definitely in the charts, but in March, I think March is, we're counting days in March, and I think there's other things that has to be done before we think it's appropriate to convene that meeting. I'm not saying no, but I don't want to raise expectations for March, but we definitely aim to have a conference. But as I've said before on that question, the key issue is to have a good conference, not a speedy conference. And we want to make sure that when we get together with the guarantors and other key players, that we know what we're there to do and that we have laid the groundwork for a constructive conference. That's what's most important for me.
Did you hear something new from Mr. Akıncı regarding the discussion with Mr. Anastasiades when they will go back to the table? If there is something new from Mr. Akıncı?
There is nothing new that I can share here, and I think that there is, let me put it that way, it's after a very solid discussion with Mr. Akıncı now and Anastasiades yesterday, it's clearer to me what has to be done, but I will try working on that, not necessarily through the media right now.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.